Yesterday, Iran did something it has never done before in the 30-year history of American military presence in the Middle East. It struck a United States military base on Saudi Arabian soil. Directly, deliberately, and it wounded American service members, not a proxy attack through Hezbollah, not a Houthi missile from Yemen, not a drone launched from Iraqi territory by an Iranian-backed militia. A direct Iranian strike on a base where American soldiers were sleeping, working, and living. 15 United States service members were wounded. Some aircraft were damaged. And the world woke up this morning to a reality that changes every calculation that has been made about this war since it began 30 days ago. The line that Iran was not supposed to cross has been crossed. This is Geo Polity. And this is episode 10. The episode where the story stops being about what might happen and becomes about what just did. Welcome back to Geo Polity. 10 episodes. 30 days. One of the most extraordinary months in modern geopolitical history. We have covered the oil shock, the China calculation, the tariff crisis, Israel's invasion of Lebanon, Putin still winning in Ukraine, Delta Force capturing Maduro in Venezuela, the Karg Island bombing, the 10-day ceasefire deadline, and the largest protest in American history. And now this. The moment that every analyst, every intelligence official, and every military planner has been quietly dreading since this war began. Iran struck American soldiers on Saudi soil. And nobody knows what Trump does next. If you are new to this channel, subscribe now and watch the full series from episode 1. Because what we are about to explain sits on top of 9 previous episodes of context. And that context is everything. For those who have been with us from the beginning, you already understand the stakes. You already understand why this moment is different. Let us tell you exactly what happened, exactly why it happened now, and exactly what it means for every scenario we have been tracking since February the 28th. Let us start with the facts of yesterday's strike. Because precision matters when the facts themselves are this alarming. An Iranian strike hit a United States airbase in Saudi Arabia on March the 27th, 2026. A U.S. official confirmed that several American service members were wounded and that some aircraft were apparently damaged. This is not the first time Iran has targeted American bases during this conflict. Iran has targeted U.S. bases throughout the region since the war began on February the 28th. But this strike is different in 2 critical ways. First, it hits Saudi Arabia, not Iraq, where Iranian proxy militias have struck American forces repeatedly over the past year. Not Syria, where the military situation has always been ambiguous. Saudi Arabia, a country that America has treated as a core security partner for 8 decades. A country protected by formal American security commitments. A country whose oil infrastructure, specifically the archaic facility we discussed in episode 7, is the single most important energy asset on Earth. Striking a U.S. base on Saudi soil is Iran saying, directly and unambiguously, we will take the war wherever America is, including your most important partner in the region. Second, it wounded American soldiers, 15 of them. Not killed, and the absence of American fatalities in this strike is almost certainly deliberate on Iran's part, a calibration of escalation rather than a maximum effort attack. But 15 wounded Americans in a direct Iranian strike on Saudi soil is a provocation of a scale that demands a response. And it demands that response at the exact moment when America is simultaneously managing a ceasefire negotiation, a No Kings protest that filled 3,000 cities yesterday, a Supreme Court battle over tariffs, a ground troop debate in Congress, and a Pentagon request for $200 billion more. This is the pressure point Iran has been looking for. The moment when the cumulative weight of every simultaneous crisis forces a choice that cannot be deferred. Now let us understand why Iran did this now. Because the timing of this strike is not accidental. Nothing Iran does militarily is accidental. Every escalation is calculated. Every provocation is designed to produce a specific effect. Iran is fighting a war it cannot win militarily against the most powerful air force in human history. It knows this. Its military commanders know this. The question Iran has been asking since February the 28th is not how do we defeat America militarily, The question is, how do we make America's political cost of continuing this war higher than America's political will to sustain it? That is an old strategy. It is the strategy North Vietnam used against America in the 1960s and 1970s. It is the strategy the Afghan Taliban used against NATO from 2001 to 2021. It is the strategy of an asymmetric adversary that cannot win on the battlefield, but can win in the political space where democratic governments make their decisions. And the political space in America right now is extraordinarily vulnerable to exactly this kind of pressure. Yesterday, millions of Americans marched in the streets specifically against this war. They carried signs saying no war. They chanted about the cost of the conflict in dollars and in human terms. They demanded that their government stop spending money on bombs abroad while families struggle at home. We covered all of this in episode 9. Today, those same Americans woke up to news that 15 of their fellow citizens, soldiers, people with families, people with parents and partners and children, were wounded in Iran's strike on Saudi Arabia. Iran understands that each American casualty changes the political mathematics of this war inside the United States. It understood it when it calibrated the strike to wound but not kill. 15 wounded Americans generates enormous headlines and enormous political pressure. 15 dead Americans might generate a different kind of political pressure, the kind that temporarily silences opposition and generates a rally around the flag effect. Iran does not want that. It wants sustained political attrition. It wants the kind of grinding, accumulating pressure that over weeks and months makes the political cost of continuing the war higher than the political cost of ending it. That is what yesterday's strike was designed to produce. And it is working. Already, members of the United States Congress who had been supporting the war are now publicly asking harder questions. The members of Trump's own party, who had already been raising concerns about the lack of congressional authorization, about the $200 billion budget request, about the possibility of ground troops, now have 15 wounded American soldiers as the concrete, human embodiment of their concerns. A senator cannot go home to their state and tell their constituents that everything is going according to plan when 15 Americans just came back from Saudi Arabia with wounds. A congressman cannot vote for $200 billion more dollars for a war without explaining to their district why that money is worth the cost now being paid in American blood. Now let us talk about Saudi Arabia. Because the kingdom's position in this crisis has just changed dramatically. Saudi Arabia has been walking an extraordinarily difficult line since this war began. On one side, it has formal security commitments with the United States. American troops are on Saudi soil. American air defense systems protect Saudi cities and oil infrastructure. Saudi Arabia's entire external security architecture is built around the American relationship. On the other side, Saudi Arabia must live in the Middle East permanently. It cannot go to war with Iran and then pack up and leave when the fighting is over. Every Houthi missile that lands in Saudi territory, every Iranian threat to Kyiv, every escalation that brings the war closer to Saudi borders is a reminder that Saudi Arabia pays a cost for American military operations that America does not fully share. Gulf nations are now seeking new defense partnerships as the Iran war escalates. CNN, that single headline tells you everything you need to know about where Saudi Arabia's head is right now. When your most important security partner is fighting a war on your territory that just wounded 15 of its own soldiers, and you did not ask for that war, and you are not a party to it, and your own infrastructure is now a target because of it, you start looking at your options. Saudi Arabia looking for new defense partnerships means Saudi Arabia is questioning whether the American security umbrella is worth the exposure it creates. It means the kingdom is exploring what relationships with China, with Russia, with regional powers might look like in a world where American military engagement in the Middle East brings costs as well as protection. This is the hidden strategic consequence of Iran's strike on Saudi soil that most media coverage is missing. The strike did not just wound 15 Americans. It wounded the American-Saudi relationship. It created a crack in the regional security architecture that Iran has been trying to create for years. And it did so at a moment when every other pillar of American alliance management, in Europe over Ukraine, among NATO allies over tariffs, with Asian partners over Taiwan, is simultaneously under stress. Now let us talk about the ground troops question, because it has just become the most urgent domestic political debate in America. As Israel and the U.S. continue to fire missiles at targets within Iran, the American military and President Donald Trump are weighing the costs and benefits of putting U.S. boots on the ground in the Middle East once again. CNN, that debate was already happening before yesterday's strike. Now it is happening with 15 wounded Americans as the backdrop. And the two sides of the debate have both been strengthened by what happened on Saturday. Those who argue for ground troops say that air power alone cannot achieve the war's objectives, that Iran has hardened underground facilities that bombs cannot reach, that destroying Iran's nuclear program and its proxy network requires boots on the ground to secure and dismantle what airstrikes can only damage. That 15 wounded Americans proves Iran is not deterred by air power alone and that escalatory pressure must be increased. Those who argue against ground troops say that the same logic that produced 15 wounded Americans in a Saudi base will produce hundreds of dead Americans in an Iranian ground campaign. They say Iraq is the lesson. They say Afghanistan is the lesson. They say that a ground invasion of a country of 90 million people, with mountainous terrain, with a motivated and well-armed military, with the support of Russia and China and North Korea, would be the most costly American military commitment since the Second World War. They say the $200 billion Pentagon request would look modest compared to the cost of a ground war in Iran. At this year's CAC, many attendees towed a fine line between backing the war in Iran and worrying about how the conflict could expand. I argue when the conservative base of Trump's own political coalition is divided about the war, the political space for escalation narrows. And that narrowing is exactly what Iran is trying to achieve. Now let us connect this to Pakistan and the ceasefire negotiations. Because the timing of Iran's Saudi strike in relation to the diplomatic process is extraordinarily significant. Pakistan has been acting as the mediator between Washington and Tehran. Its foreign minister confirmed this week that Iran agreed to allow 20 ships under Pakistani flag to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, 2 per day. Pakistan's foreign minister Ishaq Dar called it a welcome and constructive gesture by Iran that is a harbinger of peace and will help usher stability in the region. CNBC. That gesture, opening the strait to Pakistani-flagged vessels, happened alongside the Saudi-based strike. The same day, the same Iran, the same government simultaneously making a peace gesture through Pakistan and striking an American base in Saudi Arabia. This tells you something essential about Iranian strategy. Iran is not choosing between war and diplomacy. It is running both simultaneously, deliberately, as a single coordinated pressure campaign. The peace gesture says, "We are willing to talk. We can be reasonable. Give us a deal we can accept." The Saudi strike says, "But if you do not give us that deal, we will keep raising the cost until you do." This is the oldest negotiating tactic in the history of warfare. Diplomacy and military pressure applied in parallel, each reinforcing the other. Khomeini used it in the 1980s. Saddam used it. The North Koreans have refined it to an art form. And Iran is using it now in 2026 against a Trump administration that prides itself on deal-making, but is discovering that deal-making with a government that believes time is on its side is a very different proposition from deal-making in real estate. Now let us talk about the ceasefire deadline. 8 days. April the 6th. 8 days from now. The Saudi-based strike has changed the atmosphere around those talks in ways that make a deal both more urgent and more difficult simultaneously. More urgent because 15 wounded Americans raises the domestic political cost of the war for Trump. A president who can end a war and bring the troops home without 15 more Americans getting wounded or, potentially, killed has a political incentive that is now stronger than it was 48 hours ago. More difficult because 15 wounded Americans also raises the domestic political cost of accepting a deal that Iran can present as a victory. If Trump accepts Iran's 5-point counteroffer or anything close to it, in the week after Iran wounded 15 Americans on Saudi soil, the political narrative writes itself. Trump made a deal with the country that just hurt our soldiers. Trump rewarded Iranian aggression with diplomatic concessions. That narrative is devastating regardless of the substantive merits of any agreement. This is the trap Iran is set, and it is a sophisticated trap. By striking on the day millions of Americans were marching against the war, by wounding Americans without killing them, by timing it to the final days before the ceasefire deadline, Iran has created a situation where every option available to Trump carries significant political cost. Strike harder and risk the ground troop debate exploding into a full constitutional crisis. Accept a deal and face the accusation of rewarding the country that just wounded American soldiers. Extend the deadline again and watch domestic and international patience for the war erode further with every passing day. There is no clean option. That is deliberate. That is what 30 years of Iranian strategic thinking about how to fight America has produced. Let us now look at the bigger picture. Because this episode, like every episode of this series, sits inside a story that is larger than any single event. The Iran war began on February the 28th with American and Israeli airstrikes on Iranian military infrastructure. It has now lasted 30 days. At least 1,900 people have been killed in attacks on Iran since February 28th, according to the Iranian Red Crescent. In Lebanon, at least 1,189 people have been killed in Israeli strikes since March the 2nd. In Iraq, at least 99 people have been killed across the country since the war began. CNBC, these numbers are not statistics. They're lives, families, communities that will carry the weight of these 30 days for generations. And the war is not over. The ceasefire deadline is 8 days away. The ground troop debate is heating up. Iran has just demonstrated that it is willing and able to strike American soldiers on Saudi soil. The Strait of Hormuz is partially open to Pakistani-flagged ships, but remains closed to most commercial traffic. Oil is at $100 a barrel. The global economy is absorbing a shock it was not built to sustain indefinitely. Shipping and insurance experts do not expect the situation to return to normal until the conflict winds down. IRU, every week the war continues, is another week of elevated oil prices, disrupted shipping, rising food costs, and economic uncertainty that compounds in the daily lives of ordinary people everywhere on Earth. Now let us talk about what you need to watch in the next 8 days. Because the period between now and April the 6th may be the most consequential 8 days of 2026. Watch Trump's response to the Saudi-based strike. Does he escalate with a new wave of strikes on Iran? Does he impose new sanctions? Does he threaten the oil terminals again? Or does he absorb the strike and keep the ceasefire talks alive? The nature of his response in the next 72 hours will tell you more about the trajectory of this war than any press conference or Truth Social post. Watch Pakistan. The Islamabad diplomatic track is the most important back channel operating right now. Every communication Pakistan's foreign minister makes publicly is a signal about where the negotiations actually stand. Watch for the language around the Strait of Hormuz, how many ships are moving under which flags, with which level of Iranian cooperation. That is the barometer of whether Iran is moving toward a deal or away from it. Watch Congress. The ground troop debate is now a live constitutional question. Does Congress pass a formal resolution limiting or prohibiting ground troop deployment? Do enough Republican senators break with Trump on this issue to create a genuine legislative constraint? The 15 wounded Americans have given the congressional opposition to ground troops a concrete human argument that was previously abstract. Watch Saudi Arabia. If the kingdom begins making independent diplomatic approaches to Iran outside of American-led channels, that is a signal that Riyadh has concluded the American security umbrella is no longer worth the exposure it creates. That would be a geopolitical earthquake with consequences that would outlast this war by decades. And watch the oil price. It is the most honest real-time indicator of what the market believes about the probability of escalation versus de-escalation. If it moves above $120 in the next 8 days, the market is pricing an escalation. If it moves below 90, the market is pricing in a deal. Watch the number every morning. It knows things before the news does. 10 episodes, 30 days. And the story is not over. What started as an American and Israeli military operation to degrade Iran's nuclear program and proxy network has become the most complex, the most interconnected, and the most globally consequential crisis since the end of the Cold War. It has reshaped oil markets, tested alliance relationships, triggered constitutional battles, produced the largest protest in American history, and now wounded 15 American soldiers on the soil of America's most important Middle Eastern partner. Every episode of this series has connected to every other episode. The oil shock connects to the ceasefire deadline, connects to the protest, connects to the Saudi base strike, connects to the ground troop debate, connects to the China calculation, connects to the Russia strategy, connects to the European fractures, connects to the domestic political crisis in America. One war, 1 month, and a world that looks fundamentally different from how it looked on February the 27th. Geo Polity has been here for every moment of it, and we will be here for whatever comes next. If this series has given you something, clarity in a time of confusion, connection in a time of fragmentation, understanding in a time of overwhelming noise, please like this video right now. 10 episodes in, your support is what keeps this analysis reaching the people who need it. Subscribe to Geopolity if you are not already here. Turn on notifications. April the 6th is 8 days away. Episode 11 is already forming, and the story is moving faster than ever. Share this video right now with someone who saw the headline about 15 wounded Americans and did not know what to make of it. Give them the context. Give them the map. Give them 10 episodes of Geopolity and let them understand what is actually happening and why. And leave a comment. Tell us, does yesterday's Saudi base strike make you think this war is heading toward a deal or toward something much worse? Do you think Trump will send ground troops? And where in the world are you watching from? Because this war is touching every country on Earth in one way or another. We read everything. Your perspective shapes episode 11. 8 days. This is Geopolity. Stay informed. Stay analytical. And we will see you on the other side of April the 6th.